Chapter 107, The Sprout of an Exchange. There was dense moss growing in the gap of the bluestone slab under the veranda, but it also showed a little yellowing on this winter day, and Jiang Xuning had been staring at the gap quietly for a long time. Her gaze was unmoved. The whole figure seemed to be still. Zhou Yunzi once accompanied Jiang Xuning all the way to Beijing, and was Zhang Boyu's old subordinate, taking the opportunity of entering the mansion to send Zhang Boyu some local products from other places to enter the mansion to see Jiang Xuning, but it did not arouse too many people's suspicions. It's just that at this moment, it is inevitable that the drums will beat in people's hearts. Ever since he relayed the situation of his dealings with the heavenly sect, Jiang Xuning had been like this, and he hadn't spoken for a long time. The half letter was pressed between her fingers. The thin page of letterhead is half new, and the handwriting on the page is strong and neatly arranged. The wind blew, and the letterhead and handwriting shook between her fingers. Zhou Yunzi also knew that this matter was extraordinary, and after thinking for a moment, he said, "That person has already taken it, but he will not write a letter to inform him like the previous person anyway, and said that this matter has been discussed with his companions before he comes out, but I am afraid that no one will take the bait again if he writes a letter. Or, if you don't do anything, you will directly use the lives of these two people as a threat to force them to comply. This is the most common practice. Few people can really put life and death out of the way, as long as the other party feels threatened enough, no matter how hard the person is, he will quickly succumb." However, Jiang Xuning's eyes were gently closed, and he actually closed his eyes, and said, "The rat trap is useless. It wasn't a fair deal in the first place. Of course, people are afraid of death, but the person holding the remaining half of the letter in his hand is not the person who was arrested by them and really threatened his life, but his accomplices scattered outside. In this way, even if it is a threat, others do not pay attention to it. Besides, no matter how you count it, they are more afraid. I'm even more afraid that the remaining half of the letter is controlled by the imperial court and the Xiao family. 50,000 taels of silver. I really dare to open my mouth?" Jiang Xuning's eyebrows and eyes couldn't help but become a little condensed, and there was a little anger in her chest, but in the end, she forcibly pressed back, "Prepare money in the morning, isn't it just to take it out when you like this? Compared with the safety of the Yanji Marquis mansion, the things outside the body are really not worth mentioning. Merely." She frowned slightly, and said, "Although the price is higher, it is not unacceptable. I'm afraid, but I'm afraid that what they say is false. Now that the Gongai Cheng has no news, this group of heavenly sect secret piles lurking in the capital have their thoughts. But if we give the money, then the public will have news again, and it is difficult to guarantee that they will not accept the money and still present the letter, so that we will lose more than we gain." When Zhou Yunzi heard this, he stopped talking. Jiang Xuning noticed it, so she asked, "What? There is other news?" "There is news. It's just that Zhou Yunzi's authority is not big enough to understand too clearly, so he is a little hesitant and doesn't dare to say it." Jiang Xuning asked. He hesitated for a moment, and said, "This missing Mr. Gongai, there is some news in the court. There are rumors in Jinyi Wei that when Yin of Shuntian Mansion surrounded and suppressed the heavenly sect 2 days ago, he shot and killed a head of the heavenly sect, which seemed to be called Gongai Cheng. But when I came to look for the second girl, I heard from my colleagues that this person was not dead, but was just arrested and imprisoned in the heavenly prison along with the other heavenly sect rebels. If any of this news is true, those heavenly sect secret piles are ready to take the money and run away, and their credibility will be greatly increased. It's not groundless." Jiang Xuning lowered her eyes, slowly folded the page of letterhead in her hand, and only said, believe it if you don't believe it." However, I could not muster up so much money for the time being, so I told the gang that I would be sincere enough to buy the letter in their hands, but I would have to ask them to wait for more than a month. You must know that although they can present the letter to the Xiao family, Ding Guogong may not be a good person, and receiving the letter may not be unsatisfactory to uproot them, and it can be regarded as a great achievement. Please don't go to their own death for the time being. Zhou Yinzi was slightly shocked. It's such a big sum of money. Zhang Xuning interrupted. You just have to say, I will find a way for the silver. Even if you count what Zhang Boyu gave you a while ago, and some of the money in your hand, you can't make up 40,000 taels, not to mention that you have to be on guard. The lack of this part of the silver is inevitably worrying. After Zhou Yinzi left, Zhang Xuning sat alone in the house, thought for a long time, and finally sighed and made a decision. She found someone and handed a message to Ren Weizi. So early the next morning, the merchants and brokers who came and went to the Shuxiang Inn suddenly found something unusual. In the lobby of the inn, I don't know when a big sign was hung, which said that 40% of the silver shares of the Sichuan Zigongren salt farm were sold out, and they got 20,000 silver, and they would return to Shu in the near future to operate the salt farm. As for the use of Zhou Tubuel, fast horses will also be sent to Beijing to report the news regularly. As for the silver shares purchased by you, if necessary, you can resell them without Ren's approval. However, the price and amount of the resale will be recorded on this sign as publicity. As soon as this brand was hung, it was suddenly thrown into Pinghu Lake like a stone, stirring up thousands of waves among the merchants in the middle of Beijing. Asterisk. Ren Weizi and Yu Fangyian's family affair was set quickly. Since Yu Fangyian told Zhang Xuning about her plans and learned that she did not object, Zhou Yinzi spoke from the Jinyi Wei Yamen, and of course he was extremely cooperative in letting people back. In the afternoon of the same day, Ren Weizi went to propose. Yu Fangyian is just a concubine in the house, and no one is willing to bother to fish her out after being locked up in the prison cell for so many days, but when she returns to the house, she will attract all kinds of white eyes, from the uncle and young lady to the maid and servant, all of them are white-eyed. Yu even resented the fact that she went crazy and almost did it to herself, so she wanted to take the opportunity to take revenge. Who would have thought that someone would suddenly come to propose? This time it was really a surprise to everyone in the house. When someone else came to propose marriage, it was naturally impossible for Uncle Qingyuan to turn people away and invite people in to talk according to etiquette. Ren Weizi's family has no relatives, and there is no one in Beijing who is familiar with him, but he came to the door by himself. Uncle Qingyuan asked. He studied and studied, but he didn't even have a reputation. He was still a businessman, and he didn't look down on it at the first time. Anyway, they are Bafu. Although Yu Fengyian is an inconspicuous concubine, but she is also from an official family, how can she be a businessman? But then I heard that his family actually ran a salt farm, and he had just raised a sum of money to return to Shudi, but his heart suddenly moved. I only asked, how much dowry do you give? Ren Weizi said, 3,000 taels. The uncle was not very satisfied, and served tea to the guest. But Yu, who was also dismissed from the palace and returned to the house a few days ago, happened to hear about it, and her mind moved, and she had the courage to invite Ren Weizi over to speak. Few people know that she also knows Ren Weizi. On that day, because she was taken home safely by her uncle for more than 13,000 taels of silver, she had a big fight with her family, and then she ignored the dissuasion of her sister Yu Shuang, and went out with the private money she had saved. At that time, I went to Ren Weizi to buy the silver shares of the salt farm. Unexpectedly, Ren Weizi actually wanted to marry Yu Fengyian. Yu hated Zhang Xuning, pressed herself in everything, and made herself lose face, and she hated Yu Fengyian. A concubine dared to pick up the bench and do it with herself, and she couldn't find an opportunity to put these two to death. She pondered it carefully, and couldn't help but sneer. It's very simple. Yu Fengyian's little hoof didn't even go out of the mansion much in the past. Where did he go to meet any foreign man? This Ren Weazi came directly to propose marriage. It must have been when she asked Yu Fangyin to come forward to ask about the salt farm, and the two hooked up. A slut who doesn't know how to check. Of course, I think so, but I don't have to say that. Yu felt that this was also an opportunity for herself. How to say that she is also the daughter of the uncle's house, and she can speak in the house. Immediately hinted at Ren Weazi. Ren Weazi was also very on the road, and respectfully asked Yu to say something for his family, and first stuffed a red envelope of 1,000 taels, saying that he would thank him again after the matter was completed. Yu was very happy with the money in her hand. She had bought more than 2,000 taels of silver from the salt farm, and she was nervous in her hands, and with this 1,000 taels of silver, she naturally moistened a lot. What's more, there is a follow-up. If Yu Fangyin marries in the past, how can she say that she is also a young lady from Bafu? Wouldn't the money she put into the salt field be more secure? It was in order to pretend to be embarrassed to agree to say a few good words for Ren Weazi. Although Qingyuan Bafu still has a title, he does not hold real power in the court, and he spent a lot of money a while ago in order to get Yu out of prison, and almost hollowed out the old bottom of Bafu. 3,000 taels is not much, but it is not a lot. As soon as Uncle Qingyuan sent Ren Weazi away, he actually regretted it a little. After a while, Yu came to persuade her, knocked on the side, and only said, "Father, this is just your confusion. That little hoof is from a humble background. Which of the wealthy families in Beijing can afford it? Even if you are a concubine, you may not want it. Now this Ren Weazi, although his background is lower, he can be regarded as a scholar. The important thing is to run a salt farm at home. Don't you know, there are many people in Beijing who have bought the silver shares of his salt farm, and if he succeeds when he returns, he may be a rich businessman. Not to mention that people are now willing to pay a bride price of 3,000 taels. It doesn't matter if this person succeeds or not, this is earned for nothing. This surnamed Ren wants to marry that little hoof. Even if we don't add any dowry to that little hoof, he won't dare to say anything." Uncle was a little embarrassed, but I told people to leave. Yu rolled her eyes and said, "That's not easy. I'll find someone to ask him to come again. Why wouldn't he come? When you see him at that time, just say that it's a test to test his sincerity, and then just take advantage of the situation to agree." After saying this, Ren Weazi visited again the next day. Uncle Qingyuan held the shelf for a while, and finally agreed to this family business. On Yu's side, she had to receive another 1,000 taels of red envelopes from Ren Weazi. That's it? It's just that Ren Weazi's family is in Shudi, and he is in a hurry to go back to run the salt farm, so he quickly finalized the wedding date. The time was set for a month and a half later. Ren Weazi returned to Shu first, and Yu Fangyin married to Shu after the dowry was prepared in a month and a half. After Zhang Xuning heard that this matter was done, she couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Everything was expected, and there were no accidents. But the rest of the merchants in Beijing were surprised by this. No one expected that Ren Weazi would really be able to raise such a large sum of money after coming to Beijing, and he also solved all the major events of his life by the way, which is really unbelievable. 3 days later, Ren Weazi set off for Beijing. The innkeeper took some money and was in charge of continuing to hang up the sign. When the vendors came in and saw it, they couldn't help but talk about it. 40% of the silver shares in the salt field are split into 40,000 shares, and 20,000 taels of silver are obtained, and 1 share is worth 5 coins of silver, that is, 500 yuan. I never thought that anyone would really pay. Is there so many rich people in the capital? Well, you don't know. How? Boss Lu of the secluded pavilion in the capital has 5,000 taels, holding 10,000 shares in his hand. I'm not afraid of a lot of money, I really dare to buy it. Yes, what should I do if the money surnamed Ren runs away? You don't understand this, do you? Everyone has negotiated family affairs with Qingyu and Bafu, which is to tell you, I can't run, and please rest assured. And if the silver shares can be resold, he can't worry that he can sell the silver shares now. To put it lightly, who would dare to buy it? Yes, don't say it's $5 a share, I don't buy $2 a share. A dilapidated salt factory, holding a blueprint that is not shown to people, who believes that he has the ability to make a salt factory. It's strange, Boss Lu only gave 5,000 taels, so who paid for the 15,000 taels? I know that Boss Lu, who is in the silk business, bought a few hundred taels of silver for a joke, and he is not short of money anyway, so he should help the juniors. Do any of you want to buy it? I can talk to you about it. Who buys this? All in all, everyone is talking about it. Curiosity is curiosity. During the time when Ren Weizi just returned to the capital, there were a small number of silver stocks outside, but few people wanted to bid to buy them. Even if there is an occasional bid, I am not willing to pay 500 yuan to buy a share. Some are 300 texts, some are 400 texts. But it's really strange, the first 5 days were not interested. To the 5th day of the real negotiation, the Silk Village boss Lu is Ren Weizi's father's friend, for the sake of helping the younger generation, spent 300 taels of silver to buy 600 silver shares in his hand. Originally when the silver was lost, I didn't think to find it back. But someone really asked him to buy it. It was a girl who came to talk, and Boss Lu didn't know him. Anyway, the other party offered 350 yuan a share, which allowed him to recover 210 taels of silver. He was very satisfied, and sold the silver shares in his hand without thinking too much. So the shopkeeper of the Shuxiang Inn changed a sign, and recorded the number of shares and the price of this transaction with clear and upright strokes. On the day it was hung up, it attracted countless onlookers. The money for the tea sold in the inn has increased exponentially, which makes the shopkeeper happy. It's just that everyone looked at the sign and pointed at it, but they all laughed loudly in general. Look, if you buy 500 yuan, you can only sell it for 305, which is a loss of 30%. Those who bought a few thousand taels of silver are so angry when they see this, right? Someone chimed in, yes, it's a big loss. Someone sighed, I think the salt farm is unreliable, and I'm afraid that no one will buy 305 in the future, and it will fall. There is a long distance between Shu and the capital, and everyone has never heard of any Zhou tube well, and they don't believe that this thing can draw deeper new salt brine from the old and unusable salt wells. The silver stock price of the salt pen continued to fall. In the next 10 days, 2 more transactions were made, but the prices were 300 yuan per share and 290 yuan per share. Ever since he knew that the silver shares of the salt field could be freely traded and resold, Lucien had been paying attention to the news from the Shuxiang Inn, and he couldn't help but scold when he learned that the first sale price was 350 yuan. When the price dropped to 290, he almost lost his nose. Although he knew that he was counting on the success of the salt farm and making a lot of money in the future, when he knew the stock price, he really didn't hold back his hand, and sat in the secluded pavilion and pulled the abacus to calculate carefully, invested 5,000 taels, and lost a small half. Yu Yu in King Yuan's mansion was even more dumbfounded. She couldn't sleep well for several days, secretly counted her money, and scolded Ren Weizi bloody. No one is optimistic about the salt works. There were still many people who went to see the Shuxiang Inn from time to time, but as the silver shares could not be sold at all, and the board was not changed for a few days, everyone's attention gradually came down, and only a few people were still very persistent in going in occasionally to take a look. It wasn't until Ren Weizi left the capital for a month that a piece of news related to the Zigong salt field suddenly spread among all the salt merchants. Zhou has been built. I heard that it was built high, several feet long, and it stood up like a small building, which looked very novel and scary. After standing up, the salt workers of the salt field hired for money began to dig down the well, and when the news came, it was more than a foot deeper than the previous salt well, and they continued to dig down. The news spread from the salt merchants to the common merchants. It didn't take long to get confirmed. Ren Weizi of Shu sent a fast horse into Beijing, and the sign in the lobby of the Shuxiang Inn wrote the news that Zhou Tube Well was the first to stand up and hit a deep well. This time, the inn, which had been deserted for nearly half a month, once again ushered in many curious businessmen, and even ordinary people who came to see the excitement. More than when it was at its peak. People with silver stocks in their hands and those who are thinking about buying silver stocks gather here to talk to each other about the situation. Although the salt brine has not really been put out in the salt factory, the bid of 290 yuan or even less is gone forever. No one sold 300 yuan, no one sold 400 yuan, and no one sold 500 yuan, until someone offered a high price of 620 yuan, which is 6 coins and 2 cents of silver, that a small transaction was made. All the people who ridiculed others for buying a loss before couldn't help but look at each other. More astute and intelligent people suddenly realized something more important from this change in price. For example, Lucien. When he heard that there was a situation where more than 600 yuan could not buy silver shares in the salt farm, the back of his head exploded, and it was only at this time that he had a little reminiscence, and vaguely understood what the simple words silver shares can be freely resold meant. It means that there is no need for the salt farm to really make money. As long as everyone thinks that the salt farm can make money, the silver stock price can skyrocket. And those who hold silver shares do not have to wait for the salt farm to operate regularly dividends, and can directly resell the silver shares in their hands to get a large amount of income in advance. Silver and silver stocks still have this kind of play. It's unseen and unheard. Lucien couldn't help but ponder, did Ren Weizi come up with this method by himself, or did other people who bought silver shares come up with a solution? He only made a total of 5,000 taels, and the remaining 15,000 taels were in whose hands?
星号
A month passed in the blink of an eye. The people on the Tianjiao side who were holding the remaining half of the letter finally couldn't sit still, and came to ask when they would be able to come up with the 50,000 taels of silver. Seeing that the agreed deadline was about to arrive, they were obviously a little anxious. Zhou Yinzi also pondered that this money was too big. Where would Zhang Xuning find it? He came to Jiang's mansion again and sent a message to Zhang Xuning. The end of the year is approaching, and there are more times when it snows in the capital. The house was already burning with charcoals. Zhang Xuning thought that she would have to go back to the palace sooner or later as soon as the matter was over, and knew that Xie Wei was a strict person, and she hadn't touched the piano for a while, so she couldn't help but feel worried when she thought about it, and played the piano quietly, so she sat at the piano table and tuned the strings at this time. After listening to Zhou Yinzi's words, she didn't even turn her eyes, only pointed to the table casually, and said lightly, "You take 10,000 taels first, call them, please rest assured. As for the rest." Zhang Xuaning's fingers were lightly hooked, and the strings vibrate, and a trembling rhyme flowed, gently swinging in the cold air, and her voice was also soft. As for the rest of the money, it's almost over. Wait. Patience and so on. It's not the best time yet.